Hello, welcome to the Tour of Pleasure here in the Enchanted Kingdom of Hermione. We're watching boat launches and plane crashes and listening to music. And today I'm going to complete a trilogy of videos I've made on the Native American band Redbone. It's a band I have been re-examining and re-evaluating over the last maybe year or so. And I started to really want to, get to know more about them. I remembered them as a kid when they broke in '69. I remember them, and I remember hearing their first record and thinking it was pretty cool. There was a lot of jamming on it, which was very popular in 1969, and I was quite into it. And then I remember their second record, Potlatch, really had a couple of great songs on it. And then I kind of, the '70s went on. I got into things like Yes and King Crimson, and then Redbone was on the radio every so often with songs like Witch Queen of New Orleans, and then ultimately Come and Get Your Love, which was a #5 hit in the States. And Come and Get Your Love is kind of a Motown soul, Philly soul kind of happy, Come and Get Your Love. Pretty good song, but not the stuff I used to really dig in the early days, and then I kind of forgot about them. And only recently I started listening to those first albums I liked again, and I really got to like them. I really started to enjoy them. I wanted to sort of get more, figure out more about them. And without too much looking around, you can find out that two of the original members of Redbone have died. And that's sad. Tony Bellamy died. God, when did he die? Quite a long time ago now. He wasn't that old. Died of liver failure. And Lolly Vegas died of essentially a stroke related stuff. Pat Vegas is still alive. Pete DePoe is still alive. And we went through the CDs and a couple of the other videos, and their strengths and weaknesses and whatnot. And in an attempt to learn more, I discovered through whatever snooping around that there were books. People from Redbone had written books about the experience, and I thought, boy, I'd like to read these. And I found them on, was it Amazon? I don't know. Over at the studio with the microphonic fool and punched in some words into the search engine, and this stuff popped up. And so over the last little while, I've bought them. Now these are books by the members or about the members of Redbone. So we're going to start with the first book I bought, and that was Come and Get Your Love, a celebratory ode to Redbone, 1939 and present, by Pat Redbone Vegas, just in case you don't get the Redbone thing. Pat and Lolly Vegas aren't just icons, but the true definition of what it took to get there. From the foreword by Frankie Vegas, who's apparently one of Pat's children. This is Pat's book. Now, Pat and Lolly formed Redbone. Pat and Lolly Vegas. Pat is the bass player. Lolly was the guitarist. They both sang. They were joined by Tony Bellamy on rhythm guitar and vocals, and Pete DePoe on the King Kong beat drums, of which we will speak of more later. This book is weird. It looks like some kind of self-published thing. In fact, on the back page, it says, oh, what's going on? My God, the interruptions. It's a busy day here in the Enchanted Kingdom. There's been many breaches of security and many comings and goings. The Empress has many things to do today. Manufactured by Amazon.ca. Bolton, Oregon? O-N? or Ontario? Amazon.ca. Bolton, Ontario. Anyway, this looks very much like a self-published book. And I remember when I went to buy it, I looked at some reviews, and one of the reviews said it was in tiny print, all scrunched up. And I didn't really know what they meant by this, but that's what they meant by this. Somebody has formatted this all back-assward. And so it is indeed rather difficult to read. You do need your glasses. And this book, boy, I'm not sure how to say this, but Pat has a very selective memory about things. And one of the things, he's very selective about how many times he's told a story, because there are some stories that get told a few times in this book. It's kind of like hanging out with that old guy at the home. And he's, Jim in the corner. Did I ever tell you the time when we was in the desert and we were against the Italian tanks? Yeah, you told me that one, Jim. Yeah. Anyway, that's a little bit like Pat reading this book. There's a story about Henry Mancini handing him a napkin with a chord on it saying, "You've invented the new music." I'm not sure what it means, but it gets mentioned at least 4 times in this book. Pat is very proud of his career, and he has every right to be. He's been a very interesting musician. He and his brother, whose real last name was Vasquez, and Lolly's name was Codillo, I think it was. Codillo. Their mom was First Nations, Native American. Their father was Hispanic. They grew up in Fresno. If I read this book correctly, they grew up essentially Hispanic. There's a great picture of them there when they were very young. They got into the music business real early. And they were really, really, they had staying power. They played in a lot of bands. They did a lot of session work. They made lots of singles under a whole bunch of different names. They followed trends. They started out, Pat did some solo singles that kind of remind me of, I don't know, Fabian. They're okay on these little tiny labels. Then they did some stuff together. What was one of the names? The Routers. And they did some surf music, really decent surf music, all very good. And they played on Sunset Strip, and they had a band with a drummer, just Pat and Lolly Vegas, and they did a record for Mercury, I believe it was, produced by Snuff Garrett and Leon Russell, of all people, live at the Haunted House, which was a place that they were the resident band, this club. And it was half covers and half originals. The originals were kind of what you would expect from a Sunset Strip band, 1965, 66. It's an interesting record. It's okay. I don't have it. I don't really need it, I don't think. It's available on YouTube for free. But the beginning of this book tells the story, and it's great. There's a great moment where one of the club, well, it's different depending on where you hear this story. It's either Bumps Blackwell or it's the club owner or somebody told him, you know what, you guys got to change your name. Those Mexican names, you'll never get work with Mexican names. And it was important. He said, the people who come to the bars don't care. It's the gatekeepers. It's the club owners. So they had a relative whose last name was Vega. So they changed their last name from Vasquez to Vegas. Because, of course, Vegas. So Pat and Lolly Vegas suddenly became, if not exactly white guys, they weren't really brown guys. And that was important in 1961, 62, 63. And so with their new names, Pat and Lolly Vegas set out to perform for 10 years in the 60s as essentially white guys. Because that's how they got the jobs. And they did quite well. And they were really well connected. Jimi Hendrix really liked them, apparently. The legend is that he suggested they form an all-native band. But at any rate, they were very well respected amongst the music community of LA. And when they kind of got to the end of their rope with the whole club scene, they kind of didn't know what to do. And so they had a drummer, and who the heck did he play for again? And there was another drummer across town, and their buddy said, I got this drummer in my band. He's a full-blooded native guy. He'd be perfect for your band. Why don't we trade drummers? So they really did. They traded drummers. Pete DePoe joined the band. Tony Bellamy had been in a band. What were they called again? It was such a weird name. And Redbone was born. And they claim in the book that they practiced for a year. And then they had a buddy who was in the band called Kaleidoscope. David Lindley's first band, Middle Eastern surf psych rock. Pretty cool band, actually. And he brought the guy that signed Kaleidoscope to Epic Records to a rehearsal session with Redbone, and a deal was struck, and Redbone were signed to Epic. They put out their first record. They put out their double album first record, which is pretty great. They put out Potlatch. They put out 6 records, I believe, for Epic. And then they kind of just disappeared. And the first few records are really funky. They're really rocking. Lots of jamming. Lots of sort of pop songs in the kind of British 60s mold, maybe. Lots of interesting chord progressions. And I would say the majority of the songs were written by Lolly. Pat wrote the next sort of most amount. Tony barely ever wrote any. He wrote one great one later on. And Pete was the drummer. I think Pete co-wrote one song. And I don't even think he played on it. He was out of the band by then. This book tells you about the story up to Redbone. And I suspect it's reasonably accurate. Now, when you read in a book countless times, now I don't want to brag or boast. What you know for sure is that the guy wants to brag or boast. And that term comes up in this book a lot. And Pat likes to take credit for just about every innovation in the bass guitar, ghost notes, whatever. And there's long stretches about things like ghost notes. He seems to need to be, remembered for pretty much everything he ever did. And I get it. He worked really hard. A brown guy in a white world making music is an achievement. And the fact that they got into Redbone, and all of a sudden they were Native Americans. There was no Mexican in them at all. So it was a little bit of a, it was like in 1969, it was suddenly really cool to have a Native American rock band. The Summer of Love and everything was right into that kind of thing. And so I can't believe that at least part of it wasn't a bit of a marketing play. Having said that, these guys really are First Nations. All of them, Tony Bellamy as well. Tony did the dancing, and he knew how to do it. He'd learned how to do it as a kid. So they weren't fakes or anything. But it's sort of ironic that the Vegas brothers spent the first 10 years of their life trying to look white, and then the next 10 years of their life trying to look First Nations, when really I think they're probably more brought up as Mexican guys. But you do what it takes, don't you? And they did it well. And the message that they put out with their music was, first Native American centered, and it was mostly a good message. It was a peaceful message. There wasn't much radical, nothing like when John Lennon did Sometime in New York City. These guys, their whole thing was about respect and getting along. And there was the song called We Were All Wounded at Wounded Knee, which CBS kind of suppressed in North America. But of course, to their deep embarrassment, thankfully, it was a #1 hit in the Netherlands. And Pat mostly wrote that song. He mostly wrote The Witch Queen of New Orleans, which was another hit of theirs. He wrote with his brother and Jim Ford, Nicky Hokey, which was their first song. And PJ Proby had a hit with it about 66. Aretha Franklin does it on Lady Soul, very good version of it there. And that was their initial sort of break in the music biz, if you will. They hadn't formed Redbone or anything then. And Jim Ford is not even mentioned in this book. Jim Ford and the Vegas brothers did a lot of work together. I can't not believe they didn't snort mountains of cocaine together. Needless to say, there was no mention of anything like that in this book. What I didn't know was that Pat has a daughter who's some kind of celebrity, married to a football player, I should say, American football player. And in her biography, when I sort of found her on the internet one day, all it says is that she was brought up by her aunt because her parents were terrible drug addicts. And I'm like, that's not in Pat's book. So, what is in the book as well, he claims to have written Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears, amongst other things. Here he's teaching Bill Wyman how to play bass. It's a hoot, this book. It was really fun to read. It was $20. I think it goes pretty much straight to Pat, so yeah, I'm glad to have bought it. It's a lot like reading Lenny Bruce's autobiography. Super entertaining. Don't bet the farm on this being accurate information. And then there's sort of testimonials at the back. It's really strange. There is an entire chapter in this book dedicated to Pat's assertion that he was cheated out of his writing credit for Come and Get Your Love. Now, if you look at the body of work these guys did, Lolly wrote the sort of good time songs. Come and Get Your Love is basically about come and get your love. Let's get it on. Pat's songs were usually the message songs, Message from a Drum and Alcatraz and 13th Hour. And Pat was the guy laden loud. He did Wounded Knee. And Lolly was doing stuff like Maggie and Tennessee Girl and those pop songs. Probably the only heavy song Lolly ever wrote, I think, was Judgment Day. Now, needless to say, because of this, what must have been a gigantic falling out with his brother, this is a bitter chapter. Boy, is he bitter. And, he didn't notice that he'd signed away the publishing, or I forget exactly what the excuse is. But if you read between the lines and look beyond this book, you'll discover that it looks like Pat had a bit of a rough time come around 1978, 79, 80, which is completely unspoken here. He mentions how he lost his gold records. Pat is still alive, still strumming his acoustic guitar, playing Come and Get Your Love at various functions, and good for him. He should be proud. His bass playing is exquisite, by the way. Reminds me of Bootsy Collins. And when this band was on the money, playing their kind of funky Cajun, I don't know, kind of like the Meters, kind of like Little Feat, kind of like, I don't know, Lolly with his guitar going through the Leslie speaker, great. Now, the second book I bought was Pete DePoe, King Kong Pete. Do these books look like they might have been made by the same company? And they are, in fact. Okay. This book is more just like this book. In fact, they might have been written by the same person. Probably not, but I wouldn't doubt that Pete took his lead from Pat. And I'll tell you what, there is a lot here. Let me see how far long it takes me to find one. No, I can't find one now that I'm looking for it, but this is another one where he says, well, I don't want to boast or brag or nothing, which, of course, he does. Now, drum freaks credit this guy with the King Kong beat, which doesn't sound like what I expected a King Kong beat to sound like. It's a very funky, syncopated beat. If you look it up on drum videos, it's there. But Pete was only in the band for the first three records, and then he was in it sort of intermittently for the next two, and he was gone by the last record. Butch Rivera took over, and another guy, Artie Vega, took over for one album. But it was weird. There's no explanation as to why Pete plays on some tracks on the fourth album and Artie plays on others, or why Pete plays on a couple of tracks on Wovoka and Butch plays on others. That's never really satisfactorily explained at all. And the reasons of Pete's leaving the band are left as murky as possible. From what I understand, he basically partied his brains out and they basically fired him, which is too bad. But it really sounds this was the early 70s. Come and Get Your Love, I think, was 73. And that would have been the absolute golden era of rock and roll stardom. And these guys in Europe, they were a sensation. You know, real honest to God Indian guys with the leather jackets and apparently, especially like in places like Holland, they were enormously popular. They were, you know, considered extremely attractive. If you go to the Redbone fan page on Facebook, you'll find that there's a interesting number of, you know, older women who enjoyed their youth in the 70s who think that the guys in Redbone are dreamy, which is really cute when I see it. They discuss the music and everything as well, but there's a lot of photos of Lolly playing and they get lots of comments. It's a good website though. I like it. I hang out there sometimes. Anyways, and so I bought those. Both of these were about $20. Then I found out about another book, and this one really got me curious. And again, looks like some kind of self-published book, but this just popped up in a search engine thing. For the Love of Lolly by Stefan Rosario Pisani, as told to his sister Linda Brandy, the backstory of Redbone's famous frontman. And there you have it. Now this is a really curious book. It is not real thick, but because Pat is so bitter, man, Lolly barely gets mentioned in this book, usually in a relatively derogatory way. It's like Lolly barely existed. This book, needless to say, is by a guy who was one of Lolly's last neighbors, long after Redbone was over. And this guy became dear friends with Lolly, and they shared a fabulous friendship for the last, I guess, 10 years or so of Lolly's life. This is made in the USA, this one. But there's actually a color picture here, a couple of color pictures. At any rate, this is essentially a reminiscence of life for the life of Lolly. Yeah, and this is basically just what a great guy Lolly was when this guy lived next door to him. And it's kind of a weird book because it kind of vaguely mentions Redbone's music, sort of. Needless to say, Come and Get Your, like, stuff like this. Now this I think was also a lot like $20, and this was a little bit of I kind of went, okay, whatever, research. But it's amazing that somebody would write this book. Now, it's this guy, Italian-American guy. And I'm not exactly sure what, it's before and after Lolly had a stroke at the end of his life. And there's things about that. But it's really strange because this is, if you're into Redbone, this is of almost no use. Unless you're just a sort of a Lolly Vegas idolizer. And I am to a point. I thought he was a fine guitar player. A very underrated guitar player. And he was, I think, more than anybody, Redbone's leader. Certainly he wrote most of the songs, probably the majority of the songs. A lot of the sunnier sort of pop songs, like I say. Pat was more into the sort of message songs. And Tony contributed to a song here and there. And only really once on Wovoka does he have one great song. which is a really schmaltzy song that I just love called Someday I'm Gonna Write Me a Good Song. And apparently he wrote it with Aretha Franklin in mind, and I can just hear her singing it. But that was his one kick at the can. And Pete got to write, I think, the words for a song about his old neighborhood in Seattle, which is an extravaganza from Wovoka featuring the electric sitar going mad at the hands of Lolly Vegas, and it's great fun. So they all got their kick at the can once at least. But Lolly was, I think, the leader. And Pat, I think, resented it forever. And I got a feeling Pat was kind of the guy that took care of a lot of the biz. Lolly was more the guy that was ultimately the kind of arbiter of what went on the records, perhaps. So there you got it. I've done my bit. Now all that remains is for me to receive the quadraphonic copy of Beaded Dreams Through Turquoise Eyes, which we accidentally ordered from Denmark, so it might never get here. But yeah, we'll mention that in passing. Probably not worth it. So there's my thing on Redbone. They're a good band. They're not great art by any stretch of the imagination, and they were sort of expedient product in a way, but the guys were such pros, and they felt the music deeply, that it's mostly really good. And even when it's not really good, it's okay. So I like them. A lot of people tell me they're a guilty pleasure. Funny thing is, very few people I talk to know who I'm talking about. Other people act as if they're gigantic stars. It's strange how it is with classic rock. So, well, there you go. Anyway, that's it for today. We'll get back at you with more stuff. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button, and take care of each other. COVID's getting better slowly. It'll be over soon, we hope. Take care.